Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The world was dying. Smoke and ash filled the skies, blotting out the sun as the remnants of humanity huddled in the last stronghold beneath the earth. The surface was a wasteland, scarred and broken by a war that should never have happened. Dr. Emily Carter stood in the dim light of the underground command center, her heart heavy with the weight of the world's fate. Monitors lined the walls, flickering with data that no longer mattered. Outside the reinforced walls, the few remaining humans clung to life in a city that had once been home to millions. Are we really going to do this? Captain Jason Reeves asked, his voice a low rumble, tinged with doubt. Emily glanced at him, seeing the exhaustion etched into his face. He was a soldier, a leader, but even he had been brought to his knees by the relentless onslaught of the Exyloths. Their alien invaders had come from the stars, bringing with them destruction on a scale unimaginable. Humanity had fought back with everything they had, but it wasn't enough. Now, this, Operation Phoenix, was their last, desperate gamble. We don't have a choice, Emily replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. If we don't try, everyone we've lost, everything we've fought for, will have been in vain. Jason nodded slowly, his gaze drifting to the others in the room. Sarah Whitman, the historian, was hunched over a terminal, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she cross-referenced timelines and historical events. Marcus Lee, the tech genius who had built the time travel device, was pacing back and forth, his usual cocky demeanor replaced by nervous energy. Everything's ready, Marcus said, stopping in his tracks. The device is calibrated, the coordinates are set. We just need to step through. Emily took a deep breath, her mind racing. They were about to do the impossible, travel back in time to prevent the war from ever happening. But the risks were astronomical. Any mistake, any misstep, and they could erase themselves from existence, or worse, doom humanity to an even darker fate. Let's go over the plan one more time, she said, needing to ground herself in the details. We arrive in 2150. A few years before first contact with the Exyloths. Our objective is to prevent the war by any means necessary. That means diplomacy, sabotage, whatever it takes. Are we sure we're doing the right thing? Sarah asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Altering history on this scale, it's not just about us. We could be affecting billions of lives. Emily understood her hesitation. The ethical implications were staggering. But she also knew that they didn't have the luxury of second-guessing themselves. We've weighed the options, Sarah. If we do nothing, humanity is finished. We have to trust that we're doing this for the right reasons. Jason stepped forward, placing a hand on Sarah's shoulder. We're in this together. Whatever happens, we'll face it as a team. Sarah nodded, her resolve firming. You're right. Let's do this. Marcus activated the time travel device, a sleek, humming machine that glowed with a cold blue light. The air around them shimmered, and a low hum filled the room as the device powered up. Emily felt a jolt of fear but pushed it aside. There was no turning back now, remember, Marcus said, his voice barely audible over the growing hum. Once we're through, we won't have any way of communicating with the future. We're on our own. Emily looked at each of them in turn, drawing strength from their determination. We're doing this for everyone. Let's make it count. The air shimmered, and the world around them dissolved into light. They landed in the past with a jolt, the air around them warm and vibrant in stark contrast to the cold, dying future they had left behind. Emily blinked, disoriented by the sudden change. They were standing in the middle of a bustling city, the sounds of life all around them. People walked by, unaware of the four strangers who had just appeared in their midst. We made it, Marcus said, a hint of awe in his voice. We're really here. The city was beautiful, untouched by the war that would eventually tear it apart. Skyscrapers gleamed in the sunlight, and the air was fresh, untainted by the smoke and ash they had grown accustomed to. But beneath the surface, Emily knew that danger was lurking. This was the calm before the storm, the brief period of peace before the Xyloths would arrive and change everything. We need to blend in, Jason said, already scanning the area for potential threats. We can't afford to draw attention to ourselves. Sarah, ever the planner, had anticipated this. She pulled out a small device and activated it, generating a set of identities and background information for each of them. We're a research team, here to study the effects of climate change. It's a plausible cover, and it gives us access to the people we need to influence. Emily took the ID card Sarah handed her, her new name and title emblazoned on it. It felt surreal, this new identity, but she knew it was necessary. They had to play their roles perfectly if they were going to succeed. Their first task was to gather information, find out who was involved in the initial contact with the Xyloths and how they could prevent the disastrous chain of events that followed. It wasn't long before they identified the key figures, a group of diplomats and scientists who would go on to represent Earth in the first meetings with the aliens. As they delved deeper into their mission, Emily found herself grappling with the weight of what they were trying to do. Changing history was no simple task, and the more they learned, the more she realized just how complex the situation had been. The war with the Xyloths hadn't been a straightforward case of aggression. It had been triggered by a misunderstanding, a tragic accident that had spiraled out of control. One night, as they reviewed their findings in the small apartment they had rented, Emily voiced her concerns. "We can't just sabotage the mission," she said, her voice heavy with frustration. "If we do, we might make things worse." Jason looked up from his notes, his expression grim. "Then what do you suggest? We sit back and hope for the best?" "No," Emily said, shaking her head. "But we need to be smart about this. The Xyloths didn't want war any more than we did. Maybe there's a way to avoid the conflict altogether." Marcus, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "What if we try to communicate with them directly? Explain what's at stake?" "That's risky," Jason replied. "If they don't believe us, we could lose any chance we have of preventing the war." "It's a risk we might have to take," Emily said. "We came here to change history, not to destroy it. We need to find a peaceful solution, if there's any chance of one." The day of the first contact arrived, and the tension among the team was palpable. They had infiltrated the diplomatic mission, posing as advisors, and now stood on the brink of the moment that would decide the fate of humanity. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as they prepared to meet the Xyloths. The alien ship descended from the sky, a sleek, organic-looking vessel that seemed almost alive. It landed with a soft thud, and a ramp extended from its side. Emily held her breath as the Xyloths emerged, tall, slender beings with shimmering, iridescent skin and eyes that glowed with an inner light. The room was silent as the humans and Xyloths faced each other for the first time. Emily felt a surge of fear and hope mingling in her chest. This was it. The moment that would determine everything. As the diplomats prepared to speak, Emily made a split-second decision. She stepped forward, drawing the attention of both the humans and the Xyloths. "Please," she said, her voice steadied despite the fear gripping her, "let me speak." The lead diplomat hesitated, but something in Emily's eyes convinced him to step aside. The Xyloths watched her with curious, unblinking eyes. "My name is Dr. Emily Carter," she began, her voice calm and clear. "I know this might sound unbelievable, but I'm from the future, a future where this meeting goes terribly wrong. We don't have to be enemies. We don't have to destroy each other." The room was deathly quiet, and for a moment, Emily feared she had made a terrible mistake. But then one of the Xyloths stepped forward, its gaze fixed on her. "Your words, they carry the weight of truth," it said, its voice resonating in her mind. "But how can we trust you?" Emily's heart skipped a beat. They were listening. "Because I've seen what happens if we don't find another way. The war between our species destroys us both. Billions die. I'm here to prevent that, to find a path to peace." The Xyloths exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Finally, the leader spoke. We too wish to avoid conflict. Perhaps there is a way we can work together to prevent the catastrophe you speak of. Relief washed over Emily like a tidal wave. This was the breakthrough they needed. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Let's make sure our future is one of peace, not war. The timeline shifted around them like a river changing course. As the Xyloths and humans worked together to ensure that first contact was peaceful and mutually beneficial, the seeds of the war were quietly erased. The tension that had threatened to ignite into full-scale conflict dissolved, replaced by cooperation and understanding. But as the world around them changed, Emily and her team began to feel the effects. They had known this might happen, but it didn't make it any easier. One by one, they started to fade from existence. Their mission complete, Jason was the first to go. He looked at Emily with a soft smile, his form growing fainter by the second. We did it, he said, his voice barely a whisper. We saved them. Emily nodded, tears in her eyes. We did. Thank you, Jason. He vanished, leaving behind only a memory. Sarah was next, her hand lingering in Emily's as she too faded away. I wish I could see the world we've made, she said wistfully. You've made it better, Sarah, Emily replied, her voice choked with emotion. That's what matters. Finally, it was just Emily and Marcus. He looked at her, his usual bravado gone, replaced by a quiet acceptance. It was a hell of a ride, wasn't it? He said with a grin. The best, Emily agreed. I wouldn't have done it with anyone else. As Marcus disappeared, Emily felt herself starting to fade. She looked around at the world they had saved, feeling a deep sense of peace. They had given humanity a second chance, even if they wouldn't be there to see it. As the last traces of her existence slipped away, Emily whispered into the void, for the future. The sun shone brightly over the earth, now thriving in the new timeline. Humanity had forged a bond with the Xyloths, their partnership leading to advances in technology, medicine, and culture that neither species could have achieved alone. The world was at peace, a far cry from the desolate wasteland it had once been. In a quiet corner of a park, a memorial stood, a simple plaque dedicated to those who had given everything to ensure humanity's survival. Their names were unknown, their deeds unrecorded, but the peace they had fought for was their lasting legacy. And in that moment, as the world moved on, the story of Operation Phoenix became a forgotten chapter in the annals of history, but its impact would be felt for generations to come. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden hue over the city, the memorial plaque stood quietly in the park, unnoticed by the few passers-by who strolled along the winding paths. The names inscribed on the plaque were a mystery to those who glanced at it, but the legacy of those who had sacrificed everything was etched into the very fabric of this new world. In a quiet room overlooking the park, Dr. Emily Carter's existence had dissolved into the annals of time, but her influence lingered. The memories of those final moments, of watching her friends fade away one by one, were still vivid in the echoes of the past. But this was a different world now, a world where the horrors of the Xyloth War had never come to pass. The future had been rewritten, and the earth had been spared from its darkest days. The people who walked the city streets below were unaware of the alternate timeline that had been erased. They lived in a world of peace, prosperity, and cooperation, where humanity's alliance with the Xyloths had led to unimaginable advancements. The cities were thriving, the air clean and fresh, a testament to the collaboration between two species that had once stood on the brink of mutual destruction. Yet, in the quiet corners of this new reality, there were still traces of the past that had been. A child laughed as she chased a butterfly through the park, her footsteps light on the grass. Her mother watched from a bench, smiling at the innocent joy of her daughter. But as the child ran past the memorial plaque, a sudden gust of wind swept through the park, rustling the leaves and lifting the child's hair. The mother shivered, as if sensing something just out of reach, a whisper of a time long forgotten. Miles away, in a research facility, a scientist named Dr. Elena Rhodes was hunched over a workstation, her brow furrowed in concentration. She was one of the leading minds in temporal mechanics, a field that had seen significant advancements since the alliance with the Xyloths. Her research was groundbreaking, delving into the mysteries of time and causality, but there was something about it that gnawed at the edges of her mind. Elena had always felt a strange connection to her work, as if she were chasing shadows in the dark. There were moments when she would catch herself staring at the equations on her screen, a sense of déjà vu washing over her. It was as if she were on the verge of discovering something profound, something that had been lost in the folds of time. She pushed the thought aside and refocused on her work. The project she was working on, dubbed Project Chronos, was her life's work, an attempt to understand the fundamental nature of time itself. The Xyloths had brought with them knowledge that had accelerated human science by centuries, and Elena was determined to unlock the secrets they had hinted at. But there was something else, something that she couldn't quite put her finger on, a missing piece of the puzzle that eluded her grasp. As she typed away at her terminal, her mind drifted back to a conversation she had once had with her mentor, Dr. Alexander Grant. He had been a brilliant scientist, one of the few who had been privy to the deepest secrets of humanity's past. There had been rumors, whispers of a project so secret that even the highest levels of government knew little about it. Alexander had hinted at it once, late at night, after they had shared a bottle of wine. He had spoken of a time when humanity had stood on the edge of extinction, of a last-ditch effort to change the course of history. But he had never spoken of it again, and Elena had never pressed him. Now, as she stared at the data streaming across her screen, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something vital. She leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples as she tried to piece together the fragments of her thoughts. There was a connection, she was sure of it, something buried deep within the past, something that had been hidden from history. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she hesitated. She could dive into the classified archives, try to uncover whatever it was that Alexander had been hinting at all those years ago. But a part of her was afraid of what she might find. The past was a dangerous place, full of secrets that had been buried for a reason. Yet, the scientist in her, the part that craved knowledge and understanding, wouldn't let it go. Taking a deep breath, she began to type, her fingers moving swiftly across the keys as she accessed the restricted databases. The system was heavily encrypted, but Elena was one of the few with clearance high enough to access it. She navigated through layers of security protocols, her heart pounding in her chest as she delved deeper into the digital vaults of history, and then she found it, a single file, buried deep within the archives, marked only by a cryptic codename, Operation Phoenix. Her breath caught in her throat as she clicked on the file. The screen flickered, and then a series of documents and videos appeared, detailing a project that had been launched in the darkest days of the war with the Xyloths. The hair on the back of her neck stood on end as she read through the reports, the pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place. Operation Phoenix had been a time travel project, a desperate attempt to send a team back in time to prevent the war from ever happening. The team had succeeded, altering the course of history and erasing the war from existence. But in doing so, they had also erased themselves, their memories and actions lost to time, known only to a handful of those who had been left behind. Elena's hands trembled as she scrolled through the final report, her eyes wide with shock. The people she had read about, the ones who had sacrificed everything to save humanity, they were the reason the world was the way it was now. They had given everything, knowing they would never be remembered, never be honored for their deeds. Tears welled in her eyes as she realized the magnitude of what she had uncovered. This was the missing piece, the shadow that had haunted her thoughts for years. Operation Phoenix had been the key to everything, and now she understood why Alexander had never spoken of it again. It was a secret too heavy to bear, a burden that had been passed down through the years, hidden from the world to protect the timeline they had fought so hard to create. Elena sat back in her chair, overwhelmed by the weight of the truth. She knew what she had to do. The world had moved on, built a new future on the foundation of the sacrifice made by those brave souls. There was no need to dredge up the past, to risk unraveling the delicate threads of time. With a trembling hand, she closed the file and locked it away, deep in the archives where it had been hidden for so long. The truth would remain buried, a secret known only to her and a select few. It was the least she could do to honor their memory. As she turned off her computer and stood to leave, Elena felt a sense of peace wash over her. The shadows that had haunted her were gone, replaced by a deep sense of gratitude for those who had come before. They had given her the world she lived in, a world of hope and possibility. Outside, the city lights twinkled in the twilight, a testament to the resilience of humanity. The war that had never happened was a distant memory, forgotten by all but a few. But the legacy of those who had fought to change the future lived on, woven into the very fabric of the world they had saved. And as Elena walked out into the night, she knew that their story, though untold, would never truly be forgotten. It was written in the stars, in the peaceful skies above, and in the hearts of those who would carry their legacy forward into the bright future they had created.